How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation, and this is the first video of the week here on PSReady. Also, sorry if you can hear my air conditioning. It's so hot here, I have to run it. I'm sorry, I usually turn it off, I just can't do it today. In today's video, I've got three topics to cover. The first one is this news story that blew up over the weekend where it looked like Sony was killing off Blu-ray discs, obviously what the PS5 uses, and I think there's a little bit of fear-mongering going on here. Second, we have even more evidence that your PS5 is about to become a PS3. And finally, I hate to say it, but the PSStars situation has gotten worse, and now it is literally factually as bad as the great PSN outage. Let's jump into this first news story though, because it's coming out of Japan, it's coming out of Sony, and I've seen a lot of fear mongering, and I don't really think it's like warranted at all. So you might have seen this news story that Sony's laying off 250 people from its physical media creation factory, like the company that they have that makes blah. So you might have seen this news story over the weekend, but basically what's going on is that Sony is cutting 250 jobs from their physical media creation department. So they're little factories that create Blu-ray discs, DVDs, CDs, anything physical that is a disc. And a lot of people, I mean, I guess like rightfully so, saw this news story and said, oh, last week we had a news story that by the PS7, Sony is going to start ditching discs. So now they're starting to lay off their physical media creation. It's the beginning of the end. Everyone started to panic, and I completely understand why. You guys know, if you watch the channel, I'm a huge fan of physical media. I absolutely love it. Not just on PlayStation, I have a ton of Switch games. I even have a few Xbox Series X and Xbox One games, a whole collection of PS3 games, PS2 games. I even have some PSP discs from when I was in middle school and high school. So yeah, I like physical media, and the idea of it going away is bad for a lot of reasons. I covered this last week, but essentially what it comes down to is if there's no physical discs, the only place we're going to be able to buy PlayStation games is digitally on our PlayStation consoles, because Sony stopped selling digital codes on storefronts like Amazon and PlayAsia. The only thing you can really get now is just PlayStation Store credit. You can't get actual individual game codes like you could if you went into GameStop right now. You'd see that huge shelf of Xbox game codes where it's like a little card with that game specifically like having a picture on it, and you pay for it as normal. And the reason it would be bad if you could only get PlayStation games from literally one source is Sony could set the price and leave it at $70, $80, $90 forever, right? Like they could control the amount of money we're paying for games. And as we've seen this generation, the shift towards digital has resulted in far fewer and far smaller discounts on the PlayStation Store when it comes to PS5 games. Like we're already 4 years into the life cycle of this console, and even games like The Last of Us Part 1 Remastered, which wasn't a full price game when it came out, has not seen dramatic price reductions since it was released. So we're already seeing that now. If they get rid of discs and make everything digital, I think it's fair to say that it's pretty much guaranteed things are just going to continue to get worse. But while that war is still being fought, and it is a war worth fighting, sorry, I'm in a like little bit of a patriotic mood because it's 4th of July week, baby. This physical media creation department being laid off at Sony is not that big of a deal, because first of all, the discs that they're creating are not the same discs that are used in the PlayStation 5. It's actually like discs that you watch movies off of or save data to. It's not the same kind of disc that PlayStation 5 games run off of. And Sony, while they did have a big hand in creating the Blu-ray disc, if you remembered back to the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation, the Xbox 360 had an external HD DVD drive, and I'm pretty sure those were made by Toshiba, but Sony went all in on Blu-ray. And because, I don't know if I can say this, but there's an industry that kind of determines what disc takes hold or what form of physical media takes hold. It rhymes with corn, because they chose Blu-ray. Blu-ray came out on top, and that's why HD DVD died off so quickly. But when Sony created or had its hand in creating the Blu-ray disc, they don't create all the discs that are used for the PlayStation 5. They actually outsource it to other companies who can produce these discs far cheaper, right? Like Sony's just giving them the roadmap or the blueprint for the disc, and then they're selling the technology off to bigger manufacturing companies like they do with the PlayStation 5. Like Sony doesn't create the components for the PlayStation 5 in-house, they outsource that as well. And this has been investigated and backed up. So for right now, there really doesn't seem to be much to worry about with Sony laying off their physical media department. If I was on my movie channel, I would be pretty upset, because physical media in movie form is like, the situation is terrible, right? Like Best Buy used to have a great movie section where you could go get any horror movie pretty much any day of the week. There were always sales running on 4K Blu-rays. Like I have a huge 4K Blu-ray collection just because I want want movies and I want games that I can just put in my PS5 and watch and play whenever I want. But Best Buy doesn't sell physical media anymore. Target has said that they're going to stop selling physical media. Walmart kind of has some cool stuff going on. They partnered up with Bloody Disgusting and they're doing cool steelbook releases of some classic horror movies. But the situation when it comes to physical media on the movie side is much more dire than it is on games. And another thing I didn't mention in my last video is if you want to see why physical media going away is bad, look at the Nintendo Classic Games situation. So right now, if you went on eBay and tried to buy a copy of The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks for the Nintendo DS, because that game was a handheld game and it was already produced at a much smaller volume than you'd get for a GameCube game at the time, or like an Xbox game or a PS2 game, it's already more valuable because it's rare. And because Nintendo keeps their games in circulation for a much shorter period than their competitors do, on top of the fact that they actually stop producing them much quicker than their competitors do, if you want to go buy even used copies of that game I just mentioned, or something like Pokemon Soul Silver or Heart Gold, the prices are not even at the level of a new MSRP price for a used copy. They're well above it. In some cases, you're going to be paying double. And people are obviously paying for it because they wouldn't be pricing these things so high if people weren't paying for it. But yeah, it really sucks. And the same thing goes for older hardware. Thankfully, Sony hardware like the PSP and the Vita, it does tick up in price, but you can still get it relatively cheap. But my friend Dustin from the Sacred Symbols podcast just picked up a Game Boy Micro at the Too Many Games convention, and he paid $155. And that's actually a pretty good deal. So if they get rid of physical media, we're going to see the same thing happen with PlayStation games because there's going to be no other way to buy them. The classic games are definitely going to be inflated because they'll be even more rare because there's an extra level of rarity added when they're for a console that, you know, can play the games and newer consoles can't. So yeah, I don't want to say that this is nothing to worry about because it is clearly something to worry about if they are trying to get to the point of having no discs. But in this specific scenario where it looked like Sony was going to stop producing physical discs very soon, we don't have much to worry about. The company that makes the discs that PlayStation 5 games use, that's still going just fine for the foreseeable future, and probably the whole entire next generation. We are going to be able to buy PlayStation 5 and 6 discs, so everything is good for the time being. Anyway, that brings us to the second news story here, which is much more exciting to me personally. We are definitely on the road to getting PS3 games on the PS5. This actually came out from Special Nick, who in the world of PS5 and Xbox leaks is a very reliable source. So once I saw that leak that Sony was working on PS3 backwards compatibility for the PlayStation 5 coming specifically from that source, I was all in. I'm like totally a believer in what that dude has to say, and I think it's definitely happening. But now we have a patent to back it up. And you know, we talk about patents a lot here on PSReady because Sony does patent a lot of things, but the cool thing about Sony in regards to them versus their competitors is that Sony traditionally doesn't patent stuff unless they want to bring it to market in some form. They're actually pretty decent at not patenting stuff just to hold it off from other developers. If you want an example of a bad situation in regards to what I was just talking to, look at Warner Brothers games. If you didn't know, those two Lord of the Rings games, Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor by Monolith, they have that nemesis system where the AI can learn, like if you kill a orc commander and then like wait later in the game, he'll come back and be meaner or like remember how you killed him, or he might have a burn on his face or something if you used a fire attack on him or something like that. And Warner Brothers actually patented that. So while that was a really cool system that it would have been cool to see show up in maybe first party Sony games or Activision games or any other publisher's games, they can't do it because Warner Brothers actually went and patented or trademarked it and they hold the rights for it. So yeah, when it comes to patents, Sony's actually pretty good, and once they actually patent something, you can rely on it coming to reality, which is great in this situation because this patent is called backward compatibility testing of software in a mode that attempts to induce skew. And this is super technical, but basically what this patent is patenting is the ability for the PS5 to introduce variables that older consoles might have had. And if you didn't know, the architecture of the PS3 was insane. Like on paper, the PS3 was far more powerful than what the Xbox 360 was doing. And unlike today, it was actually a vastly different console than what the Xbox 360 is doing. Where we're at right now, there's really not much of a difference between the Xbox Series X and the PS5. They both run AMD chips. They're both basically small PCs that they're selling for $500. It's not very hard to port games from one console to the other, relatively speaking to how it was back in the day on the PS3 and Xbox 360. So to emulate PS3 games, there's a lot more work that goes into that on the back end. It's not as simple as porting up a PS2 PS2 game and running an emulator. You actually have to emulate the way the console behaves because unlike the PS4 and PS5, the jump between PS3 and PS4 was moving between completely different architectures. Whereas with the PS4 to PS5, the jump was moving from one console to a more powerful version of that console. It's like very slightly different, but not so different like it was with the PS3 and PS4. So what this patent allows Sony to do is create an emulator that makes your PS5 think it is a PS3. So it can introduce all of the variables that the cell processor would have brought up back in the PS3 days. And not only will they be able to like recreate those with the PS5, they'll also theoretically be able to fix them so that the games actually look and run better than they did in the PS3 generation. And going back to the PS3, that was a great console, right? Like it had the ability to output in 1080p, which is shockingly crazy for the time that it came out, right? Like we were still using CRTs when the PS3 released, and you know, HD TVs were nowhere near as prevalent as they are now, but Sony future-proofed that thing so that if and when HD TVs became the norm, which they eventually did, you'd still get a good experience out of the PlayStation 3. And as someone who lived through that generation and bought a PS4 at launch, I kept my PS3 around a lot longer than I did my PS4 because the backwards compatibility wasn't there. That's obviously a huge factor, but the PS3 got a lot of games after the PS4 came out, like Dark Souls 2, and because that thing had the ability to output at 1080p, it wasn't nearly as bad playing PS3 games when the PS4 was out as it was playing PS2 games when the PS3 moved on to HD TVs. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, this is even more evidence that Sony is working to get backwards compatibility going. Of course, the one big caveat that we've heard is it's not going to be like the PS4, where you can theoretically play every PS4 game that was ever released on the PlayStation 5. The wording that we're going to hear from Sony, if all the rumors and leaks are to be believed, is that select PS3 titles are going to be ported up. But the cool thing for us is that during the PS3 generation, game development took far less time than it does now. Like in the PS3 generation alone, we got Uncharted 1, 2, 3, and The Last of Us from Naughty Dog, whereas in the PS4 generation, we only got Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us Part 2, right? Like there was the Nathan Drake collection, but that wasn't like a full-on internal Naughty Dog project or anything. So you can see how they went from making 4 games in one generation to just 2. There's a big drop off there. That's like a 50% drop off. So in the PS3 era, if they're just looking at their first party titles, I mean, there's a huge list to choose from. You've got GT Prologue, you've got GT5, you've got GT6, you've got Infamous 1 and 2, you've got Infamous Festival of Blood, you've got Resistance 1, 2, and 3, you've got Uncharted 1, 2, and 3. There's so many games in the PS3 generation that they could theoretically have a very steady drip feed going where every month they could just release a couple of PS3 games into the PS Plus Premium catalog, and it would take them quite a long time to actually run out of games to port up. So it's honestly a great situation. Obviously, I'd prefer it be when this PS3 emulation does launch on the PS5, they just release all these games onto the store because I bought a lot of them digitally. I own a lot of them still on my PlayStation account and I'd be able to just download them. But you know, the idea of getting to play Killzone 1, 2, and 3 and all the other games I just mentioned on my PlayStation 5 with upscaling and smoothed out frame rates and, you know, modernizing them like the Xbox Series X does with Xbox 360 games, that's going to be awesome because as good as games like Gears of War 2 and 3 are, I love playing them on my Series X. There's so many more games that I'd love to play even more on my PlayStation 5 from the PS3 era. Anyway, that brings us to the third news story here, which is an update on the PSStars situation. So if you haven't been keeping up with this, PlayStation Stars is the rewards program. It's now the de facto rewards program for the PlayStation ecosystem because PlayStation Rewards, which was tied to the PlayStation credit card, has been retired. Basically what you do is you complete campaigns, you get coins, you can then spend those coins on actual full games, you can spend them on PlayStation Store credit, and if you buy a lot of digital games, like when I need to capture footage and I can't get to the store and I buy a digital game, it actually gives you a lot of points that you can then spend on really cool stuff for your PlayStation 5. But now, 4 weeks ago, it went down and there's been no word from Sony on when it's coming back. They did bring back the logo because initially what happened is the logo went away from the PlayStation app. The logo comes back, but if you click on it, it takes you to a screen that it's under maintenance and yeah, we don't know what's going on. At first, people were upset that they weren't getting their points for buying digital games, which, you know, would have a market effect on how much people were buying digital games on the PlayStation 5, but it's now been confirmed that points are tracking while the service is down, so that's a nice consolation. But the biggest problem here is that now that it's been down for 4 weeks, it's officially been down longer than the PlayStation Network was during the PS3 era. I actually didn't know that the PSN only went down for 3 weeks, but man, back when I was in high school and that happened, 3 weeks of my entire summer felt like pretty much the entire summer where I couldn't play games online. And it also limited you from patching games. So when new stuff would come out, or if you bought older games that had gotten patches or updates, you couldn't download those from the PlayStation Network because you couldn't access the PlayStation Network. And I don't really want to compare these apples to apples because they're really not. Like, not having access to the PlayStation Network is admittedly far worse than not having access to PlayStation Stars. But as someone who discovered PlayStation Stars this year and has gotten games like Rise of the Ronin off of it, or multiple packs of $20 currency for the PlayStation Store that I then go spend in Diablo 4 or Gran Turismo or something like that, it does suck that I don't have access to that, especially right now when I'm on the insane credit grind that is Gran Turismo 7. Like, this would be a perfect opportunity for me to convert some of my points into gift cards to then spend on the microtransactions in Gran Turismo 7, because I'm not giving them any of my real money. There's no way in hell I'm doing that because I hate the economy in that game. You guys know that as soon as we hear anything from Sony, I will do a video on it, so make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications set to all. This is a pretty big issue, and from the outside, for Xbox fans or Nintendo fans or PC fans, it's kind of hard to understand why it's such a big issue. But if you're someone like me who likes saving money at any opportunity possible, it sucks not having access to something that, honestly, from a brand like consumer friendly perspective, is a net positive. The rewards program that PlayStation Stars offers, well, at first we thought it was just going to be NFTs and garbage no one wanted, it is a legitimately useful service. And I talked to a lot of you guys on PlayStation Network messaging that say you use things like Meyer points here in Michigan, or Best Buy rewards to get your rewards points when you buy products at Best Buy, and then you turn around and buy games. Like, everything's expensive right now, and any edge you can get to make things a little bit cheaper, I completely understand why that would be a big deal of it going away. So hopefully we get some clarity, some answers, some response from Sony soon, or best case scenario, they finally bring back PSStars. But yeah, it's been over a month. That makes it officially longer than the Great PSN outage. And yeah, it's not as bad of a situation, but it's definitely not a good one at all. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you today. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.